cup of Stanley. Pucktales, woo! Pucktales, woo! Here in Puckberg.
Welcome, everyone, to the newest episode of Here in Puckberg on the Hockey Podcast Network. I am your host, Kyle Sullivan, a.k.a. Shaggy Von Doom, with another episode of Pucktales.
Woo!
And the you-know-who at the other end of the woohoo is none other than Derek Felska.
Yep.
He is... Don't adjust your YouTube screens or your audio dial. That's right. He's a Minnesota Wild fan.
Yeah, it means you're somewhere between denial and alcoholism.
Yeah. But you have the state of hockey. I mean, what more do you want?
Yeah, we also have Hockey Town USA and Warroad too. I always want to say that because, Detroit co-opted it in the 90s, but Warroad had been calling itself that since 1955. And as a Minnesotan who's very provincial, like most Minnesotans are, hey, it's our territory. Back off, stay off my yard.
And this is a disadvantage to all of those that are not watching on YouTube right now. Right behind Derek, he has NHL 97 on
You're right.
on the screen. And that game was absolutely pivotal for me growing up and knowing the game of hockey.
Yeah, I think video games are a way a lot of people enter into hockey. I thought it would be just cool to have it up there. I would rather have NHL 94.
Yeah.
But my Sega CD is hooked up on a different television. So I threw NHL 97 on there because honestly, one of the things that kind of made me fall in love with NHL hockey, especially after the North Stars left Minnesota, was, believe it or not, the Stanley Cup run for, I know you guys would, for Colorado, that was your opening time, but it was actually Florida.
Interesting.
And the reason was, while I liked the Avalanche to an extent because they were the Nordiques, and I kind of felt that Nordiques' pain became your gain, was I really liked the out of nowhere thing that Florida had. I mean, they were not a team that probably scared anybody, but they just worked their asses off, and they paid a heavy price, but by the time they got there, I think they were pretty much exhausted.
Yeah.
And the Avalanche star power rose above and came away with the sweep.
Yeah, that Avalanche team that met Florida in that cup final. The Avalanche, of course, with the Nordiques, what they were building there. I feel like it's definitely Florida ran out of gas. Like, it was kind of a really good team that kind of bonded together and really got to that moment. It was like a very hot year compared to a slow build of what Quebec was building, and then just relocated to Colorado, and Florida fell victim to what Quebec was building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jealously, and again, this is kind of where this might surprise you. After the North Stars left, of course, a lot of people wanted the NHL back. And any team that was rumored to be a potential relocation, we became kind of passive fans of. We're looking at the Nordiques, and of course at this time they were bad, and they were racking up all these really high end players that were young, and you're going, come to Minnesota, or it was true with the Nordiques, it was true with the Winnipeg Jets, which were talked about, the Hartford Whalers. In fact, there's a pretty cool old video called Norm Green Sucks, and it's a great time capsule because it was a guy who just walked around with his video camera talking to North Stars fans, like probably in the last month or a few weeks of the season, just asking for their 2 cents on Norm Green, which of course they all had a lot of colorful things to say about the guy who we felt stole the team or took the team from Minnesota to Dallas. But one of the things that said in there, the guy was, maybe we'll get the Whalers. I mean, that was kind of like a hope to, as a lifeboat, that maybe the NHL would return a little bit sooner. But alas, everyone went someplace else instead. And we had to wait, of course, until 2000 when the Wild came back. But,
And
you know,
and also during that time, I believe the Vikings were up for sale.
yeah, well, there's a lot of reasons to that. The Minnesota Vikings wanted to leave the Metrodome, and the little known fact that people don't talk about was during the probably like the early 90s when the Vikings were a good team but not great, which is kind of eternally the Minnesota Vikings in a lot of ways. Um, their general manager somehow got the deal for all the concessions in the Metrodome. So
Mm,
and that passed on once, the team changed hand to different owners. Well, that's a huge revenue stream and they
yeah.
wanted it, but this ex general manager of the Vikings was banking all the money. So they wanted to get the heck out of the Metrodome because they weren't making as much money as they could. So that was always the debate about getting a new stadium and threatening to move the team. And that was like 20 years in Minnesota. Not even, I'm not exaggerating at all. It was 20 years of will they or won't they?
Because I remember because at that time I was living in right outside of Birmingham, Alabama.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the rumor was Birmingham's about to buy and take the Vikings,
Yeah,
and
there was a businessman that did they went down there and took a look at it. There were other places that they did that too.
yeah,
And the Vikings were really, at least fans were fearful of that. And you have to remember too, the early 90s was the recession.
yep,
It was not a time to start building stadiums, and that played a role in the North Stars leaving too because they just built the Target Center for the Timberwolves. Um, and the last thing anyone wanted to do was spend another $100 million to build a new arena. Yeah, the Met Center was old, but at the same time, people were like, we don't have the money for this. And of course, right across the street from the Met Center was the Mall of America being built, and that was
yep,
already over budget on its own.
yeah, and because I remember that time very vividly because it kind of went hand in hand. Like to an outsider, especially living in Birmingham, you're like, "What is going
Mhm.
on?" You're watching the North Stars leave, and then you hear all this unrest with the Vikings, and it stood out to me because during that time, like I was still younger, but I remember you could go to the store and like I think gas stations, yeah, that's where it was. You could buy
Oh,
like Vikings hats with
yeah,
no like team name on it. It was
yeah,
just the Vikings logo, and they're
hmm
trying to generate interest, and I'm like,
yeah.
wow, because Alabama still to this day does not have a professional team. So, of
Nope.
course, that would drive interest just to have some kind of professional team in Birmingham.
Yeah, and it's all. Let's face it, it's all about the posturing.
Yeah.
In the late '90s too, another team that flirted with coming to Minnesota for the NHL was the Edmonton Oilers.
Mhm.
Peter Pocklington was looking to uh, I guess put a little leverage against the city of Edmonton to either sell the team or whatnot. And he came to Minnesota. He's like, I don't know, I might be interested in moving to Minnesota. And we're all like, yes, 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 come here. And it really was just a ploy just to bilk some more money and sell the team. So I think a lot of cities get used like that. I mean, look at Hartford and the New England Patriots.
And
My wife was going to the University of Hartford at the time, and Hartford jumped in with both feet, like, yes, we'll take the Patriots,
yeah.
and it was really just a sucker's bet to get a stadium in Boston.
And it's funny, it like all comes full circle now because any team with any kind of financial problem, it's immediately rumored they're moved to Quebec.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody's pointing towards Quebec. Now that Vegas is crossed off the list, it's now Quebec is and they lost the team. And now
Yeah.
you're just playing with that fan base. And I feel bad for them because
Oh,
I don't foresee them getting a team for quite some time.
and that's terrible to me. It really is. Especially given the circumstances in Arizona, where it is an abject embarrassment that they're playing in a 5,000 seat college arena for what might be two, maybe even for the foreseeable future, and that that's a market that the NHL is saying, well, we'll just let it sit there, when other markets like Atlanta or what's like that, nope, we're moving them. Nope,
Yeah.
we're gonna move them. And I've been to Quebec. My wife and I went there It was a while ago, about 15 years ago, and we went to the Colisée Pepsi with all the old Nordiques banners. Patrick Waugh, we went to a junior game, the Quebec Rum Parts, which he's an
Mhm.
owner of, and he kind of, I don't know, you'll probably be proud of this as an Avalanche fan. He kind of stood up in the owner's box like he was Benito Mussolini, like Il Duce, sitting there stoically looking like, you're not gonna call a penalty on my team,
Yeah,
and
that
that
sounds
was a
like Waugh.
blast. But I mean, there's still a ton of passion there, and now they built the Videotron Center, and it's a beautiful facility, and yet the NHL seems to have little or no interest in moving back, and it seems like a shame when you've seen some of the success stories. And now look at Minnesota. I know people, sure, the attendance for the North Stars at the end was not great, and that played a role into it, and that's a hole in their story unto itself. But the second story, of course, is how successful it was when it came back.
Yeah.
Same thing with Winnipeg. They lost their team. It's been fantastic since it's back. Does it always work out? No. Look at Atlanta. They lost the Flames. They get the Thrashers. No, the strikes. They're probably done. But
Yeah.
still, I think there's a reason. I think you want hockey where it's going to be enjoyed.
And out of the 3 teams that kinda came back around that time, like Nashville, Columbus, and Minnesota,
Yep.
like Minnesota, just the way it launched and how the team was comprised, it has that feel like they've been around forever. Like, people forget, like, the Ottawa Senators have not been around forever, but
Nope.
it feels like they have been, because
Yeah.
kind of the histories merge, and you feel like they could be an original 6 team, but they're really not. They're very new.
Mhm.
It's the same thing with the Wild. They have that feel like they've been around forever, and I think it's because there's so much reverence for the history of hockey in Minnesota.
Oh, immensely. And the Wild were very clever at not pretending as though that previous history didn't exist. Um, in the Wild's early marketing, like the intro video, they showed footage of the North Stars. They showed footage of the Minnesota Fighting Saints, of the
Mhm.
West, the World Hockey Association. I know, since you lived in Birmingham, the Bulls were their last professional hockey team in
Yep.
Birmingham, Alabama. Um, some hilarious stories about the Bulls and the Fighting Saints because they love to beat the crap out of each other, literally and figuratively.
Steve
But anyway,
Dubano, we're talking to you.
oh yeah, the Carlsons,
Yeah.
Gord Gallant, yeah, definitely. But still, Minnesota is a very passionate fan base. Probably one of the unusual things about it is that if you go to a Wild game, you'll see tons and tons of North Star sweaters because
Yep.
that team is very much loved. Of course, when the Wild did their retro reviews reverse jersey, it was definitely an homage to the North Stars. And I can tell you for a fact, if the Wild were to change their colors to the North Stars colors, it would win hands down.
Yeah.
I know there's a segment of the fan base, especially the older parts that love the North Stars, that would much rather see green and gold than green and red. And I know the Wild probably tried to avoid it, but we love those colors, and
Yep.
there's still a huge connection to that.
And Minnesota had Gordon Bombay. I mean, he played for the
Oh,
Wave.
oh,
I mean, he could have had such a great career, and it just didn't happen. So he had to coach a D5 team.
yeah, poor guy. I,
Poor Gordon Bombay.
I'll admit I'm a little older, so that's a movie that, as you kind of noticed by my reaction, since you can't see it if you're not watching the YouTube, I rolled my eyes pretty heavily at that. I hate the Mighty Ducks.
Yeah,
Slap shot, old school guy like that all the way. But I know, the funny thing is in Minnesota, especially if you're from the Twin Cities, it seems like everybody knew somebody that was somehow an extra in that movie.
yeah, I could imagine.
Like my ex fiance was a person that sat in the crowd of Mighty Ducks 2. And she's like, "You could see me." And so we watched the stupid movie to see like her head for like 2 seconds. I don't know. It's
I'm
like everyone has a story like that in Minnesota. It's kind of funny.
and everybody's gonna put it in their social media bio.
Oh yeah.
Extra in D1, the Mighty Ducks.
Yeah, of course. It's my claim to fame.
You get your voter registration card and your SAG card because you're an extra in the Mighty Ducks
Yeah.
movies.
Yeah. Well, for a time there in the early 90s, Minnesota was kind of a, I don't want to say, it was kind of a little mini spot for movies. They made like Reality Bites. There was a bunch of movies that ended up having scenes in Minnesota for whatever reason. I think even a scene in, well, I know there's a couple different movies that actually featured hockey too. I know like some that even had Minnesota in the title, like the movie Feeling Minnesota and whatnot. But yeah, they shot a lot of movies in that area for a little brief period of time.
Now, we've talked about kind of like the midpoint. What, other than being born in Minnesota, and I think it's in the tap water that you must be a fan of the game of hockey. What got you into the game of hockey?
Uh, Easy to say is my dad. Um,
Mm,
my dad was he grew up at a time, like one thing that we don't always think about, I guess maybe today, like where kids go to indoor rinks, is that for most Minnesota kids, it's all about being on the frozen lakes and ponds, or like the local frozen sheet outdoors. And he got me a pair of skates, I think when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And he takes you. In my hometown of Elk River, there's a place called the Pit. It's a dug-in earthen stadium, and it has this old warming house that's from like the 1920s. And you go in there and it's like living history. You put your skates on, it's cold as hell, and you would just skate literally till, pretty much they would shut the lights off on you. And even then,
wow.
sometimes you'd keep trying to play in. And it sounds very romanticized, but that's literally what it was. And you'd be playing pickup games with the neighborhood kids, and I don't know. But my dad kind of instilled it into me because he did that when he was a kid, and there was no in his town there was no organized hockey. It was just pickup games, and for a lot of places it was that way. It wasn't until about the '60s that organized play and arenas started being built where people were playing, longer parts of the year other than just the seasonal kind of thing. But it definitely was kind of it's definitely like you said, it's more in the tap water. I think it's really ingrained through your blood, you know.
Yeah. I could see that, like, because it's, I know as an Avalanche fan,
Hmm.
we always like to make fun of Minnesota in every way we can, and because it's just what you do. That rivalry, since the Red Wings rivalry has, it's not as potent as it used to be. We have to find somebody to hate, and because of that Game 7, Minnesota is public enemy number one.
Hmm.
So, uh, I can't remember a preseason game the two teams have had where there's not been a fight between the two. But we'll get to the NHL fandom in a little bit. But when it comes to Minnesota being the quote unquote state of hockey, it does feel very generational. And I mentioned earlier, like that reverence for the game that
Hmm.
Minnesota took when it came to the Wild. I feel like that's also handled with everybody from Minnesota. There's like a reverence to the game and a general natural cultivation of the game.
Yeah. Um, I think people connect to it in a number of different ways. Youth, high school hockey is its own huge giant unto itself, and there are definitely groups of fans that high school hockey is all they care about.
Yeah.
The pros, college hockey doesn't matter as much to them. And then there's the college hockey niche where they're all about the Big Ten and the NCHC and the CCHA now, not the WCHA,
Yeah.
and which most Minnesotans love the WCHA and wish it never left. But anyways, that's a whole different story. But through it all, hockey has just become a bigger thing. And now, especially the last 20 plus years, girls and women's hockey has been just absolutely exploding in popularity in Minnesota. And the quality of it, since I'm an older person, I'll just say it out. I don't really care. I'm 44. The first high school hockey started, I think, in 1995 when I was a sophomore in high school. And, you know, for a lot of girls at the time, they were just learning how to play then. Now,
Mhm.
20 years down the road, all those girls have been grown up playing hockey since they were like 3-year-olds, just like the boys. And the skill improvement is just unbelievable.
And you have the Whitecaps there.
Oh, the Caps have been a great inspiration, but they've been around for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
long before there really was even a league, they were playing anybody that was willing to play college teams, other kinds of kind of sort of club teams like they used to be. A woman actually from my hometown named Sue Ring Jarvie was really kind of the one, along with a couple other women, started really the Whitecaps, and it's been an institution for over 20 years in the state. So it wasn't something that had to be manufactured. It was already there.
Yeah.
And that says, you know, it's kind of speaks to what you said, you know, that it's already woven into the fabric of the state.
And I can imagine with the Wild coming back, only just sending that into like a fever pitch. And like, not gonna lie, even though I wear the colors I do and I have the colors behind me that I do, that Stadium Series game, those jerseys. Mm.
The Stadium Series ones,
Yes,
not as opposed to the Winter Classic ones.
or am I? Yeah, the Winter Classic. Yeah, the against the Blues.
Yeah, the Winter Classic
Yeah,
ones, I thought those were better than the ones from the Stadium Series. Um, although
the
I
ones that
will.
had St. Paul on the crest.
Yep, yep, and this is Minneapolis, St. Paul. Yeah,
The
yeah,
old
I thought
school
they were.
looking gloves.
Yeah, the only thing I hated were the stupid elbow patches. They look like a bad college professor, you know, like with the tweed jacket. I didn't understand that one because nobody does that. That was kind of dumb. But the rest of
I
it was, I thought it was solid.
Yeah, I felt like it was their way of trying to really tie in that retro feel of it, and I was like, that really wasn't that big of a thing, but I know what you're trying to do there.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely
Yeah,
definitely better than the Blues, and definitely better than anything Colorado has put on the ice anytime they come outdoors. We they have not been any good jerseys from Colorado, except
yeah,
the Utah the reverse retros that we wore. Those were nice, but like I'm not a fan of anything we've had outside yet.
yeah. That, you know, you bring up the reverse retros. That's something where I felt like the Wild didn't wear it often enough. I know the fans wanted to see it, and at the time with COVID, um, the Wild fans didn't really get the chance to see them in attendance.
Yeah.
So by the, you know, they were just starting to open up the arenas a little bit more, where they had like 3,000 and 4,000 people, and they never had it. They never had them on when you had a full arena, which I thought was kind of unfair in a
And
way.
you and with the reverse retros coming back for what I guess they're calling a 2.0,
Yep.
um, and this also being Adidas's last year with the
Hmm.
jersey, do you expect to see those jerseys a little bit more?
I hope so. Although the Wild seemed to be, like I said, I thought they could have wore them more, but I'm guessing they chose not to for whatever reason.
Yeah, because the Avalanche, and I will bring them up every chance I get. If I'm talking to a Minnesota Wild fan, I have to. It's in my my fan contract to bring up the Avalanche every breath. But
It's okay.
the Avs, they had their third jersey. They
Hmm.
wore for divisional matchups. The ones that we play every time, like the blue, like Rockies kind of themed one.
Yeah.
And going into that season, I thought it would be a perfect time to put those like on pause and then
Hmm.
introduce the reverse retro as your third. And I thought that should have been something league wide, but
Yeah.
I guess this is why they don't pay me to come up with smart jersey decisions in the NHL. This is why I'm
Hmm.
just a podcaster. But it was very head scratching to me that you only saw it a very select few amount of times, and then that was it.
Hmm. And I would also say, since you're talking about jerseys, they stopped making them pretty quickly. And I
Hmm.
know for a fact there's a lot of people, like myself included, I was waiting for them to continue to issue them, and I guess I missed out, which
I
annoys me.
I have two of the Avalanche reverse retros. Was is a
Hmm.
Kadri that's aged well, and I have a Joe
Hmm.
Sakic, so that will be
Timeless.
timeless. Yep.
Yep.
So, but yeah, and also, you know what? Now this is fun that I get the chance to pick the brain of a Minnesota Wild fan. Um, I know you mentioned the colors, and of course the running joke of it looks like
Christmas
Subway.
sweaters. Oh, okay.
The reverse retro.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody said it was the Subway logo. Oh, I'll get to the. It's funny you bring that up because I call Minnesota the Christmas tree sweaters. But
Hmm.
is there anything you wish Minnesota would improve or do when it comes to this next reverse retro? Because I know the Avalanche are going to do a Rockies themed,
Hmm.
which is a problem all on its own. That's not really our history. That's New Jersey's history. But uh, what do I know? What do you think Minnesota should do?
Well, at least the rumor that I've heard that it's just going to be the green North Stars jersey. It'll be
Mm.
it'll be a yellow, um, I think, Wild logo on the green jersey. So it'll be like the white shoulders, green base, and then like I think the yellow and black stripe, like the 1991 Stanley
Mhm.
Cup run North Stars, which again that'll probably go over very very well, with fans. You know, personally, I would love to see them do a color shift and go to that, because I don't think you're really disrespecting the Minnesota Wild. And I know originally it was very kitschy with like all the names of the different colors on our jersey. I don't know if you know this, but it's like forest green, harvest, like harvest. That's kind of like the off whitish color that we have, or whatever it's
Mhm.
called, harvest wheat. And I don't know, it kind of makes me realize, we don't need to brand everything, but that's what they did, and that was their way to bring things together. But I know there's also a segment that really resists that. They're like, no, no, we're the Wild. It's something different. But oh well. I don't
I
know. I'm an
I
older person.
See, I also am in that same mindset when it comes to the Wild and kind of tying the 2 together, the history and bringing it forward and Minnesota as an identity, because when they first started, they were very heavy on the reliance of that green and red. Green and red, those are your
Uh-huh.
colors, those are your primaries, and then it was like the 2010s, they started playing around with green and white. It's a lot of green and white heavy. Like, you start getting more white primary, like,
Hmm.
shirts and, like, the hoodies, and it's, like, green
Yeah.
and white primary, and I was like, is this where they're going to start to segue into a color change? Because it's not as red dominant as it used to be.
Yeah. Possibly. I can tell you this. The Iowa Wild already have a white and green jersey
Mhm.
where it just says Wild in like the script, like the Minnesota style script that they have, which is that kind of cursive kind of thing. Um, I think that looks really sharp
Yeah, I do
myself.
too.
Um, it looks really clean, which is something traditionalists typically like. And I don't know, to me, I've I've never liked, like, even when we had our red jersey as basically our home, or either our alternate or our home
Oh, yeah.
jersey, eh, it just got old really fast. Where it's, again, it looks like a bad Christmas sweater all the time. And I don't know. It's something that I think they want to get away from, but at the same time, I think they get a lot of pushback from their season ticket holders. I don't know. I know they've done surveys. I'm not a season ticket holder. I haven't been privy to see one, but I know they've done surveys about it.
So, let's also talk about, you also are editor for Crease and Assist. You blog.
Yeah,
This is
that's for
we're
my
now we've talked about the past. We've talked
yeah.
about kind of that middle,
Mhm.
the, like, 2000s, 2010s.
Yep.
Let's talk about the current state of things.
Okay.
As an Avalanche fan,
Mhm.
top of the world. It's wonderful. It's great.
That's easy.
It's been a long, crazy road,
Mhm.
like, from the literal cellar to the top.
Uh huh.
Minnesota has been consistently hovering where they are.
Lake Wobegon,
Yeah.
above
Eh,
average. It's
yeah,
Garrison Keeler.
it's Garrison
Yeah.
Keeler. I was literally about to, that takes me back. But what is there any pressure from fan base, from management, from any are you comfortable where you are? Where you're
Me,
not having bad Minnesota hockey? As long as Minnesota hockey's not bad, we're fine. Is that okay?
to me, no. To some, yes. Uh, Me personally, I don't see the point of being above average and just getting one and dones all the time. There's enough Minnesota's sports teams that do that already. The Twins, Vikings. I mean, those teams have all been sitting in kind of an above average purgatory forever. And I realize that there might be this fear that if the Wild ever were to really be in the basement, that somehow it would bring up like the fears that they're going to leave or something. But
Yeah.
I think people need to really check that and be like, no, that's not going to happen. But at the same time, just being above average means you're kind of destined to continue to be above average. You don't.
Yeah.
We're not going to end up with unless we stumble onto it through sheer luck, like a Kirill Kaprizov. You're going to be stuck with guys that have like second and third line potential as forwards, because that's who you're drafting in the latter half of the draft all the time. And I'm a little bit maybe on the outside than other groups that I'm willing to be bad in order to be good, because to me, looking at Colorado, mind you, Colorado had some fortuitous timing, because that's always a big part of it. And I think that, well, let's face it, you got to be bad in the right years.
Yeah.
If there's a draft that's weak or crappy, being bad doesn't really help that much.
That's why I'm bringing up Minnesota. Is this the time to be bad with the way contracts are structured with the top of that central?
Personally, I think yes, but the timing. Here's the timing part. You have Gabriel Kaprizov right now locked in for another 4 years. You're trying to convince him to eventually, hopefully, sign a contract extension to continue to be your superstar for the foreseeable future. How do you convince him to want to stick around if you're just going to turn into a pit? And unfortunately, because of the contracts that we had, which we bought out, which
Mhm.
I totally agree that we bought them out. Trust me, I thought Ryan Suter and Zach Parise were horrible cancers to the locker room. I advocated that for years before it happened. Unfortunately, we got terribly punished because of it. And the timing now puts us in a really awkward state where it's going to be really difficult to be truly competitive in the sense of being a Stanley Cup contender if we're even close to that, which I don't think we are. But at the same time, you're trying to convince this guy you should stay here.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate thing too with his contract is the fact that 2 years from now, that's when his no movement clause kicks in. And so to me, maybe this is the cynical person in me, because if you don't know much about me, I am a bit of I consider, I don't know, I guess you could say my spirit animal is Socrates.
Mm.
I am the stinging gadfly on the furled rump of the Wild fan base, and I'm not afraid to ask the uncomfortable question. And I really believe that because of his contract, the Wild really need to consider, if they don't believe an extension is possible 2 years from now, they really have to consider trading him,
Yeah.
because you cannot afford to lose him for nothing. And I know that's sacrilege to say, considering how long we waited to actually have a superstar. But at the same time, as it happened the last time we had a star player, which was Marion Gaborik, and we let him go for nothing, that dogged the team for basically the next 7 or 8 years, because we didn't have that kind of player. And, we kept trying to find him through free agency, and that's a really tough thing to do. They just don't happen, as our franchise history definitely shows.
Yeah, and I also handle the Avalanche that same way. I don't
Hmm.
drink the Kool-Aid all the time.
Oh, I don't at
Um,
all.
yeah, and it's great to be at the top and have the cup and say all this wonderful stuff about this is how you should do it. It
Hmm.
helps when you draft a Cale Makar and
Yeah,
everybody else doesn't. Um,
Nathan
like
McKinnon. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and but it also takes it takes cojones to say no to Ryan O'Reilly, no to Matt
Yeah.
Duchene, no
Hmm.
to Stasny, no to Tyson Berry, and say this is the core we want to build around. I know you're talented and contribute, but you're not going to be a long term thing.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
with Minnesota, other than Krill the Thrill, is there a core to build on? Where is it, and what do you do in goal?
Well,
Like how I
I
snuck
think
that last one in there.
I think the goaltender part actually is the easiest one to answer. Um, I think it's clear that I think their hopes are resting on Jesper Wallstedt for sure, and that's the plan really moving forward. I don't think they would have made some of the moves they did, like moving Kaapo Kakkonen, and then bringing in Fleury, with the idea that they had this future number one in mind. So
Mhm.
I think he's really at least the long term plan to be the anchor, hopefully in a couple years. Um, as far as the core, I mean, obviously, so he'd be a core piece. Um, Otherwise, I would say in terms of my people, I would say is the core. Well, Jared Spurgeon's here whether you want him or not
Yeah.
because he's got a no movement clause. I think he's signed for the next 6 or 7 years. Jonas Brodin, and I say that in a good way because I think he's very underrated.
Hmm.
Beyond that, you have Matt Boldy, who I think
Yeah.
is
True.
obviously starting to blossom, and hopefully will get better. And then it really comes down to their young core of prospects, which are now starting to get closer to maturity. Marco Rossi, and then of course their long, really loaded list of defensemen like Kalen Addison will probably get his opportunity. Brock Faber, Carson Lambos, those kinds of guys, and then the forward hopefuls. Yurov looks good. Kuznetsov looks good. So it's really kind of looking into the future, but we're still going to have to wait a couple years for them all to be here. And I think that's kind of what we're banking on, at least at this point. Um, but in the here and now, at least probably for the next 3 years, it's probably Kirill and not much else, at least in terms of hope.
Because something I always spin as a cautionary tale to like Avalanche fans now, like getting Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar,
Hmm.
Miko, like list the roster. Like having
Hmm.
them now, here and now, is one thing.
Yeah.
Having the Central in their timeline is
Yeah.
another. St.
Hmm.
Louis is on the way down.
Yep. They're getting
Minnesota
older.
is, yeah, Minnesota's where they always are.
Yep.
But Anaheim is starting to make some moves, and
Yeah.
they're trying to build something. LA is trying to build something.
Hmm.
Arizona and Chicago are clearly at the bottom fighting for the number one.
Yep.
So with the timeline now, it's favorable for the Avs.
Hmm.
It'll be favorable for the Avs next year,
Yes.
possibly the year after.
Yep.
But you have like St. Louis falling down, which only rises Minnesota.
Hmm.
And then whatever Chicago and Arizona plans on doing in the future, now they start after, and they're behind LA and Anaheim. All these teams are building.
Hmm.
So when do you get on the merry-go-round? Because eventually, I hate to tell you, Father Time is undefeated, and the Avalanche will be a getting older team. Especially, we're coming up on Nathan McKinnon's contract next year.
Hmm.
He wants to be the richest player, and understandably and
Yep.
deservedly, he wants to be the richest player in hockey. Um, Eventually, that contract's going to be ugly. It's going to be Kovalchuk ugly towards the end of his life. Minnesota, you said they have a couple years before their prospects start making waves on the team, and you can start building things around. Does that in turn not rule favorably for Minnesota?
I think it actually. Well, I think it's favorable because we do have a lot of young pieces in the pipeline that'll be coming into fruition. But what that makes it challenging for is I know there's a lot of pressure from people. Oh, go get JT Miller or go try to get these kinds of players. Well, the problem is at some point, if you start to develop the talent the way you think that talent's going to develop, you're going to have to pay them, and you
Mhm.
got to have the space to pay them. Otherwise, you're going to find them priced out. and
Yep.
then you're having to deal them when you don't really want to. For example, just what we saw just this obviously early in the summer, the Minnesota Wild, more or less because of cap constraints, was compelled to move Kevin Fiala,
Yeah.
the person who had the second uh, best season in Minnesota Wild history, other than Kaprizov in the same season, and that was 85-point scorer. And why? Because there were probably some deals that Bill Guerin maybe has some impulse buys he shouldn't have done. He was like the little kid at the supermarket who sees a candy bar and throws it into the basket. We didn't need to do that, and
Yeah.
that cost us the space. So then we had no choice but to deal him, because if you think about it, he's still a relatively young player entering his prime. That's exactly the kind of player you'd want to keep around, but instead we had to send him away.
And
And let's face it, we don't have a long history of scorers in our system. We just don't.
and with if you you see what's happened in Chicago like last
Yeah.
year. They had Fleury, they had Seth Jones,
Yep.
and there was that little bit of rumor and hype before the season started that Chicago's going to start making waves and they might make a cup run this year. It's
Hmm.
the last run for Tays and Kane, especially with these acquisitions. And then everything went south all at once, right out of the gate.
Yep.
And they can't fully commit to this rebuild because yes, everybody's on the move, everybody's jumping ship. They can't move from that Seth Jones contract. It's
Yep.
bad. It's
Yep.
ugly. And you're holding on to it, trying to do one thing, and when it all fell apart, now you knock the house down and there's one pillar you can't get rid of.
Yep. Well, and I say that's another thing that as a Wild fan, and again, the stinging gadfly that I try to be, um, is look at all the no movement clauses Minnesota has. We have more no movement clauses. I think we're tied for first with three other teams. I think with five, and I think four of those or three of those are on our defense. Well, like cement blocks you can't move because those players have all the leverage to say whether they leave or stay. Um, Jared Spurgeon, he has a very loyal following of fans that love this undersized defenseman that plays above his weight. But he's signed until he's 38, and he has a no movement clause. And we made that deal I think when he was 30. Why? You know, it's like it's at times I feel like our team and our organization is like overly sentimental and we hold on to them longer than we should. And like you said, they become things you can't move. And then when you need to make a move, you can't.
Yep. Yeah, Minnesota's got more clauses than a Christmas village. Um yeah, it's
Nice one.
yeah, and it's one of those things that you want Minnesota to as a hockey fan at my core, I'd like to see them just do a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's they're consistently right there.
Mm-hmm. They're a
And
teaser.
that's yeah, and you want to see them do a little bit more because it's I can't tell you how sick I am of every time the playoffs roll around, it's St. Louis, Minnesota.
Yep. And
Because that's where
we're sick of it too.
yeah, it's I'm like, well, I know exactly what's going to be in this matchup.
Yeah.
So I really don't have to tune in because it's year in, year out.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll get the weird Dallas, Minnesota. And you're like, "Oh, well this will
Yeah.
be interesting." But you know what you're getting. And
Yep.
I want Minnesota to surprise me.
Yep.
Oh,
You're kind of saying like it's deja vu all over again. I think that's a Yogi Berra quote.
it is.
And I mean, the story of the Minnesota Wild, it's I don't know to use a Wild player. Charlie Coyle was good for this, where he'd make like a remarkable play, and you're like, holy crap! And then of course you never see it for another 3 or 4 weeks. And that's the Wild, where they'll do these incredible things at times where it'll take you out of your seat in terms of like, how did they pull that off, like a comeback, or all the times last year when they pulled their goalie and put a goal. We had a lot of empty or goals with the extra attacker last year that saved us, got us points. Pulled out a lot of wins that way. Well, they do that, and then they get to the playoffs, and it's kind of like half the team really wants to be, the other half doesn't seem to want to be there, and then it's like the same old story, and we're all waiting for it to turn the page. So you feel like you got teased. So like last year, best season in Minnesota franchise history. So what? Another first round loss. It didn't. And again, if you look at our fan base, there's a segment of fans that are so they're like, oh, we had a 100-point season from a player for the first time, our best season ever, and they're all happy. And then there's the other part that's like, well, it's another first round loss. So there's like two different camps.
Yeah.
And they don't get along. Well, it's true. It's kind of like a homers versus non-homers. If you're
Yeah.
a homer, you're buying the idea that, see, this is the team that Billy built, we're on the way, and then the other part's saying same old Wild.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And my last question to you,
Sure.
across enemy lines, before we wrap up, your goal song.
Oh God.
Do
Shout.
you like it?
Horrible.
Okay.
Can't stand it. I mean, we had, well, originally it was the rock and roll part 2 or whatever
I
that
think
everyone had, and then
90%. Yeah, I think
yeah.
90% of the NHL had that as a goal song at one point
Well,
there.
that actually started, the Minnesota North Stars were the first to have that song. And so that was kind of a link to that. And then for years it was crowd chant. And then of course after Prince died, there was this big push to change it again. And then the season ticket holders apparently wanted crowd chant back. So then they would do crowd chant at the end of the game if we won, even though the goal song was still Prince, Let's Go Crazy. And then I guess the team picked Shout. That was what the players picked, and it's horrible. I hate it.
I will say that my favorite thing Minnesota has done was go with Let's Go Crazy, because that just hits, especially after a really good goal. That really hits.
Yeah.
I thought that was the best move they possibly could make. And then when that kind of shifted from that, I was like, never mind.
Yeah. My friends have a theory that it's just because people can't stand up and like clap to it or chant to it as much, so they wanted crowd chant back because that was easy.
I don't know if those people have ever been around a hockey game. And after a goal scored, the last thing I want to do is something else with everybody else in a uniform fashion. I'm just cheering and celebrating my team.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. Yeah, it's something that needs to be changed, and hopefully it's something they do change this year, because shout didn't make anybody really want to shout other than just shut it off.
That's what you're shouting. Shut it off.
Shut it off.
Cut the music.
Well, I just want to say one other thing.
Yes.
From a Wild fan perspective, since you wanted kind of that viewpoint, I think one of the things that really, I'll admit that as a North Stars fan, I was kind of intermittent because the Gophers were really my jam as a kid. That's really what my dad introduced me to, was the Gophers. And the Gophers were always one of the preeminent programs in college hockey. And those games were always exciting. Where when it was announced that the Wild would have a team, I jumped in with both feet, because it's one of those unique opportunities to start with the franchise. And you feel like you have that perspective. I know when you were talking with Neil, he kind of discussed this a little bit too, but you feel like you've jumped in at the start, so you feel like you've owned it. And the fact that I've been there from day one, that's kind of something you pride yourself with. And when the Kraken came to the league, I told people, embrace this. This is a special time where you can say you were there from the start.
Yep.
And enjoy it. And I was there when, the Wild, if you look at the Wild's opening day roster, it was literally like, huh? Who? Like, there was nobody on that team. Our payroll was only $16 million. 16.
With
We
6
had-
no move clauses.
Well, not then. Actually, everyone's like on 1-year deals, because all those guys wanted the opportunity to leave if they could.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a whole book about it called How to Bake a Franchise by Tom Lynn, our former assistant general manager. And he talked about how you had to be careful with that, because some of those guys were like, Here, give me my paycheck. I'm leaving.
Man.
But anyways, I remember the 2003 run, which I know sticks maybe in your craw a little bit, but it was kind of like the Florida Panthers in '96.
Yeah.
We were a team of, unlike the Vegas Golden Knights, which tried to say they were cast-offs, we were literal cast-offs. We
You
were
were.
guys that had chances to play in the NHL but couldn't stick. So this was their opportunity to play like Wes Walls, Antti Laaksonen, Jim Dowd. They were literally NHL cast-offs from all over the place. And Jacques Lemaire, who's still my favorite Wild coach, and I know we were like the anti-Avalanche. You guys were fun and exciting, star-studded. We were the team of nobodies, but we played a system that made things hell for everybody we played against. We
Yep.
were plotting, we were defensive, and in 2003, somehow we found a way to score in overtime and win overtime, which we didn't the previous 2 years. And they went on an improbable run where we were better than the sum of our parts.
Yeah.
And that's something I'll never forget. That was, I realize it's definitely the farthest the Wild has ever been, but that was a magical year. It was my first year of teaching too, so I remember staying up because the 9:30 starts for the Vancouver series were horrible, and I told my students, like, I might be really weird because of course when you win a game at almost 12:30 and like after midnight, it's hard to go to sleep.
Yep.
But it was a fun run, and I would never trade it for anything.
Well, Derek, I know we're
I'm sorry for
on.
talking so much.
No, that's literally the point of a podcast. I'm glad you are talking a lot. Because people don't want to hear me; they want to hear Minnesota stories. I would like to, from across enemy lines, say you're one of the good ones. You're one of the good ones. So, all's fair here. It's a ceasefire between this one, and thanks for coming on and sharing your story. And if you happen to spark the ear of some listening Minnesota Wild fans, or change the heart of some Colorado Avalanche fans who want to follow you some more, how can they find you?
Well, probably the easiest way to do it is on Twitter at Crease and Assist. You caught me at a weird time because I'm probably going to be switching my blog. I've had Crease and Assist for a long time, and it's through a website called the Sports Daily. But
Mhm.
I'm going to be transitioning soon to a website called Inside Hockey.
Mhm.
So that it's really just my own little transition, but catching me on Twitter is probably the safest way to do it. Um, I guess since I didn't really introduce myself, I've been blogging for about 18 years. So again, it's kind of like that idea that I've been there, done that. I've been through the tough times. I've been through the good times, and I feel like I have a pretty good perspective of what this team's all about. Not
Yeah,
just a Johnny come lately kind of thing.
yeah, it comes with substance, and you
Yep.
can point to like, I,
History.
yeah, you can point to history and say, "This is why I've seen it happen this way
Yep.
or this way. This is why it should go this way." I completely understand that.
Yep.
Uh,
It's I was gonna say that's why, like, I know a certain segment of Wild fans are all excited about our prospect pool. It's been highly touted and all that stuff. And as a person who's been there before, there have been, about 10 years ago, we had heard the same thing, and you know, we know how that resulted. So they don't like hearing that, but it's true. It was hyped just as much. It's just
yeah.
with Twitter, it makes it a little louder.
Oh, it makes it a lot louder. Trust me, I know exactly what you're talking about. But Derek, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, and definitely give Derek a follow. And if this is your first time stopping by here in Puckberg, you can follow the show on Twitter at HPuckberg on Twitter, here_in_Puckberg on Instagram. We're on YouTube. You can see NHL 97 right now if you hurry up and get over to YouTube. And we will, again, thank you so much for coming by. And we will catch you again on the next episode real soon.